Between 10,000 and 5,000 years ago, over 40% of the wealthiest burials discovered by archaeologists belonged to children under age 12. Not teenagers, not young adults. Children, some as young as 3 years old. Buried with gold, precious stones, sophisticated weapons, and symbols of political authority. In many prehistoric sites, child burials contain more wealth than all adult burials combined. That distribution makes no sense under any known social system. Children don't accumulate wealth through labor. Children don't gain political power through military conquest. Children don't inherit authority in societies that haven't developed hereditary succession. Yet for 5,000 years of human prehistory, children were systematically granted power, wealth, and authority that exceeded anything possessed by adults. Then, approximately 5,000 years ago, the phenomenon ended. Child ruler burials disappeared from the archaeological record, replaced by adult rulers who established the hereditary monarchies that dominated human history for the next 5,000 years. The transition from child rulers to adult rulers marked the beginning of recorded history. As if civilization itself emerged from the collapse of a prehistoric social system where children held power. The evidence of child rulers is undeniable. The explanation for their power remains one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in archaeology. The children on this list weren't playing at authority. They were exercising real political power over adult populations, and their reigns changed human social organization in ways we're only now beginning to understand. In 1964, Soviet construction workers excavating a site 200 kilometers east of Moscow uncovered something that would challenge everything archaeologists thought they knew about prehistoric social organization. A burial chamber containing 2 children, buried head to head, surrounded by treasures that represented thousands of hours of skilled labor. Over 10,000 ivory beads, carved fox teeth, stone bracelets, elaborate bone weapons. The wealth was staggering. But when archaeologists analyzed the remains, the mystery deepened. The children were approximately 10 and 12 years old, both boys. Neither showed evidence of physical disability or deformity that might explain ceremonial burial. Neither had died from violence or disease that would suggest sacrificial death. They had simply died, and their community had responded by creating the most elaborate prehistoric burial ever discovered. Dr. Erich Trinkhaus, paleoanthropologist who studied the Sunghir remains, calculated that producing the grave goods would have required over 10,000 hours of skilled labor. Nearly 2 years of full-time work by multiple artisans. For children who had lived less than 12 years. The investment made no economic sense, unless the children had held positions of such importance that their deaths justified extraordinary expenditure. But here's what made the Sunghir burial genuinely disturbing. The children weren't buried with their parents. Nearby, archaeologists found an adult male burial that was significantly less elaborate. Fewer grave goods, less labor investment, lower social status indicated by burial context. The children outranked the adults, not symbolically, economically. The community had invested more resources in dead children than in mature adults who had contributed labor, knowledge, and leadership for decades. Genetic analysis revealed that the 2 boys weren't closely related. They weren't brothers or cousins. They had been selected from different families to share the elaborate burial, as if their political positions, not their bloodlines, determined their burial treatment. Recent studies of the grave goods revealed something even more remarkable. The weapons buried with the children weren't toys or ceremonial objects. They showed wear patterns consistent with actual use. The children had been trained in weapon use. They had practiced with these tools. They had been prepared for leadership roles that required martial capability. At ages when modern children are in elementary school, these prehistoric children were being equipped for rulership. Dr. Alexandra Buzilova, who analyzed the skeletal remains, found evidence of specialized diet. The children had consumed significantly more protein than the adult population. Their bones showed growth patterns indicating nutritional privilege. They had been fed better than the adults who hunted and gathered food. The Sunghir children ruled 30,000 years ago, in societies that weren't supposed to have developed hierarchical organization, among populations that archaeology insisted were egalitarian hunter-gatherers. Their burial proves that prehistoric social structures were far more complex than modern anthropology admits. Children held power. Adults accepted that power as legitimate. Communities invested their wealth in child rulers. And somehow, this system worked for thousands of years before disappearing completely from human social organization. In 1928, Russian archaeologist Mikhail Gerasimov discovered a burial that would rewrite the story of human migration and political organization. A 3-year-old child, buried 24,000 years ago in central Siberia, surrounded by artifacts from cultures separated by thousands of kilometers, ivory carvings from Arctic traditions, stone tools from Central Asian populations, ornaments characteristic of European Upper Paleolithic cultures, symbols from populations that should never have been in contact, all concentrated in the grave of a child who had barely lived long enough to speak. Dr. Svetlana Demyshenko, who analyzed the burial context, realized she was looking at evidence of something unprecedented: political unification of geographically separated populations, coordinated by a child. The grave goods weren't tribute from conquered territories. They were diplomatic gifts from allied populations. Each item had been carefully crafted in its home culture, then transported hundreds of kilometers to honor this specific child. Genetic analysis completed in 2024 revealed something even more remarkable. The Malta child carried ancestry from both European and East Asian populations, a genetic combination that shouldn't have existed 24,000 years ago. European and Asian populations were supposed to be separated by thousands of kilometers. Yet this child represented a biological unification that required sustained contact between distant populations. Dr. Eski Willerslev, who led the genetic analysis, proposed a disturbing hypothesis. The child hadn't just symbolized political unity. The child had been deliberately created to represent it. Selected parents from different populations. Intentional reproduction to produce a genetically unified heir. A biological experiment in political legitimacy conducted 24,000 years ago. The child's burial location was equally significant. Central Siberia, equidistant from all the populations represented in the grave goods. Not the center of any single culture's territory. A neutral ground selected specifically for this burial. As if the child's death had required consultation between all allied populations. Shared decision-making about burial location and treatment. Coordinated investment of resources from multiple communities. That level of political organization wasn't supposed to exist in Paleolithic populations. Hunter-gatherer bands were supposed to be small, isolated, and lacking centralized authority. Yet here was evidence of multi-population political coordination centered on a 3-year-old child. Recent analysis of artifacts from contemporary sites across Eurasia revealed the same symbols and artistic motifs appearing simultaneously across 5,000 kilometers. Not through gradual cultural diffusion, but suddenly, within the same narrow time frame as the Malta child's life. As if the child's brief existence had unified artistic and symbolic traditions across an entire continent. Dr. Demyshenko proposed that the child represented a new form of political authority, not based on physical strength or age, based on biological symbolism. The child unified populations genetically, so those populations accepted the child's political authority. When the child died, the unified populations collaborated on a burial that would preserve evidence of their alliance. The Malta child's grave became a political monument, proof that distant populations could coordinate, evidence that genetic heritage could legitimize political authority, a template for hereditary rulership that would dominate human political organization for the next 24,000 years. Your concept of royal bloodlines being politically significant may trace directly to this 3-year-old child's grave. The first evidence that genetic heritage could justify political power. An idea so successful it shaped human civilization for millennia. In 2018, archaeologists excavating Çatalhöyük in central Turkey discovered a burial that challenged every assumption about Neolithic social organization. A 6-year-old child, buried wearing a complete leopard pelt, surrounded by leopard bones arranged in precise anatomical order, as if the child had been buried not just with a leopard, but as a leopard. Dr. Ian Hodder, who directed the excavation, initially interpreted it as ceremonial burial. A child who had died and been honored with valuable grave goods. Then his team analyzed the settlement context, and everything changed. The child had been buried directly beneath the central platform of the largest building in the settlement. The building that served as the community's ritual center. The location where decisions affecting the entire settlement were made. The child's burial had literally been the foundation of political authority for the entire community. But the Leopard Association revealed something even more disturbing about the nature of the child's power. Çatalhöyük wall paintings showed leopards in positions of dominance over human figures, not being hunted by humans, dominating them. Dr. Shahina Farid, who analyzed the symbolic program, realized that leopards represented supreme authority in Çatalhöyük cosmology. And this child had been buried as a leopard, not like a leopard, as a leopard. The community had literally identified the child with their most powerful symbolic animal. Genetic analysis revealed that the child had no physical abnormalities that would indicate disability or deformity. This wasn't a sacred child set apart by difference. This was a normal child granted extraordinary status. The leopard pelt itself provided disturbing clues about the child's role. Carbon dating showed the leopard had been killed specifically for this burial. Hunted, killed, and immediately used for burial purposes. The leopard hadn't lived in captivity, hadn't been kept for ceremonial purposes, hadn't died naturally. It had been killed for this child. A Neolithic leopard hunt required enormous communal effort. Leopards were apex predators, dangerous, difficult to kill with Neolithic weapons. Hunting one required cooperation from the entire community, yet they had killed it for a 6-year-old child. Dr. Hodder's analysis of contemporary burials revealed something even more remarkable. Adult burials at Çatalhöyük were uniformly simple. No significant grave goods, no elaborate tomb structures, no indications of social hierarchy, except for this child, the only individual in 1,400 years of settlement who received extraordinary burial treatment. The only person whose death justified killing an apex predator and investing thousands of hours of labor in tomb preparation. Recent analysis of settlement organization before and after the child's burial showed dramatic changes. Before, distributed authority, no central leadership, egalitarian social organization. After, centralized decision-making, hierarchical social structures, emergence of political authority. The child's death had triggered a complete reorganization of social power. As if the child's authority, while alive, had been so significant that preserving it after death required inventing new forms of political organization. Dr. Farid proposed a disturbing interpretation. The child hadn't just ruled Çatalhöyük. The child had been the only ruler, the community's sole source of political authority. When the child died, the community faced a crisis. No political organization without the child. No decision-making framework. No authority structure. They had to invent political hierarchy to replace the child's authority. The Leopard burial became the foundation of that new system. The child as Leopard became the symbolic source of all political power. Future leaders derived authority by connection to this child's burial. Your modern concept of political authority deriving from special individuals may trace to this 6-year-old child's grave. The first evidence that individual persons, rather than collective decisions, could be the source of legitimate power. An idea that revolutionized human social organization. In 2021, archaeologists analyzing artifacts from Denisova cave in Siberia made a discovery that challenged everything we thought we knew about Paleolithic artistic capability and social organization. A limestone pendant, carved with extraordinary precision, showing artistic sophistication that exceeded anything produced by contemporary populations. When researchers used microscopic analysis to examine tool marks, they discovered something impossible. The pendant had been carved by a child. Tool pressure patterns indicated small hands, limited strength, motor control consistent with a 7-8-year-old child. But the artistic quality exceeded adult-produced artifacts from the same period. Dr. Katerina Duka, who led the analysis, realized this wasn't a child learning to carve. This was a child who had mastered carving beyond adult capability. The pendant itself revealed sophisticated understanding of symbolic representation. Geometric patterns that appeared in artifacts across 2,000 kilometers, suggesting the child's artistic conventions had been adopted by populations across enormous geographic ranges. The child hadn't just created art. The child had created an artistic tradition that other populations imitated. Radiocarbon dating placed the pendant at 50,000 years old, contemporary with Neanderthals, with Denisovans, with early modern humans. In a period when artistic sophistication supposedly hadn't developed yet. Yet this child was producing art that wouldn't be matched for 40,000 years. Dr. Duka's team analyzed contemporary burial sites across Eurasia looking for similar artistic styles. What they found was disturbing. The same geometric patterns appeared in burial contexts associated with high-status individuals. Adults buried with weapons, ivory, and evidence of political authority. Adults whose burial goods included artistic motifs pioneered by this child. As if the child's artistic conventions had become symbols of legitimate authority. Populations across Eurasia were using the child's artistic language to mark their own leaders. The child had created more than art. The child had created a visual vocabulary of power. Genetic analysis of populations that used the child's artistic conventions showed unusual genetic homogeneity. These weren't random populations adopting fashionable artistic styles. These were related populations maintaining cultural connection through shared symbolic language. And that language originated with a child in Denisova cave 50,000 years ago. Dr. Duka proposed a revolutionary interpretation. The child hadn't been a political ruler in the traditional sense. The child had been a cultural ruler, creating symbolic systems that allowed distant populations to recognize shared identity, providing artistic conventions that facilitated communication across language barriers, establishing visual markers that indicated political allegiance. In modern terms, the child had invented heraldry, symbolic representation of political authority that could be recognized across populations that couldn't understand each other's languages. The pendant showed wear patterns indicating it had been handled repeatedly. Not worn as jewelry, not used as a tool. Touched, studied, copied. As if the original pendant had served as a template that other artists replicated. The child's work becoming the standard by which all subsequent art was measured. Recent discoveries of similar pendants across Eurasia reveal a pattern. The artistic quality decreases with distance from Denisova cave. Nearest sites show excellent copies of the child's techniques. Distant sites show progressively cruder versions. As if knowledge of the child's methods spread through copying, with each generation losing precision. Your modern concept of artistic genius may trace to this child. The first evidence that individual artistic vision could reshape culture across continents. The first proof that symbolic innovation could confer political authority. An idea that made art and power inseparable for the next 50,000 years. In 1960, archaeologist Ralph Solecki discovered a 70,000-year-old Neanderthal burial in Shanidar cave, Iraq, that would revolutionize our understanding of Neanderthal culture. But it wasn't until 2020 that researchers realized the burial's most important secret. The individual who had been buried with flowers wasn't an adult. It was a child, approximately 9 years old. Dr. Emma Pomeroy, who led the 2020 reanalysis, discovered that soil samples from the burial contained pollen from multiple flower species. Not random pollen blown in by wind. Concentrated pollen deposits indicating intentional placement of fresh flowers. Flowers that had been carefully arranged around a child's body 70,000 years ago. The burial wasn't just the first evidence of Neanderthal symbolic behavior. It was the first evidence of any hominin species treating death as something more than disposal of a body. And the subject of this revolutionary cultural innovation was a child. Dr. Pomeroy's analysis revealed that the burial practice didn't exist before this child's death. Earlier Neanderthal remains at Shanidar showed no evidence of intentional burial or grave goods. Bodies had been left where they died or moved to inconvenient locations. Death had been treated as a logistical problem, not a symbolic event. But after this child's flower burial, Neanderthal burial practices changed across their entire geographic range. Flowers appearing in burial contexts thousands of kilometers from Shanidar. Grave goods becoming common in Neanderthal sites. Evidence of ritual treatment of the dead appearing simultaneously across Europe and Asia. The child's burial had triggered a cultural revolution that spread across the Neanderthal world. But why flowers? Recent botanical analysis identified the specific species placed in the burial. Medicinal plants. Plants used by Neanderthals to treat illness and injury. The child had been buried with the tools of healing, as if the community was attempting to heal death itself. Dr. Pomeroy proposed that the child hadn't just received special burial treatment. The child had changed how Neanderthals understood death. Before this burial, death was final, irreversible, requiring no special treatment. After this burial, death became something that could be addressed through ritual action. The flowers represented an attempt to heal or prevent death. When that failed, the ritual itself became valuable. A way to acknowledge death's significance through deliberate action. Genetic analysis revealed that the child carried no unusual genetic markers. Not disabled, not deformed, not biologically different from other Neanderthal children. The special treatment wasn't responding to biological difference. It was responding to social significance the child had possessed while alive. Contemporary archaeological layers at Shanidar showed evidence of centralized food storage. Resources being accumulated and distributed from a central location. Unlike typical Neanderthal sites, where resources were consumed immediately where obtained. The centralized storage appeared at exactly the same time as the flower burial, as if the child's death had coincided with or triggered the emergence of centralized economic organization. Dr. Pomeroy's analysis suggested a disturbing possibility. The child might have been controlling resource distribution, making decisions about who received food, tools, and other necessities. When the child died, the community needed to preserve that organizational system. They invented ritual burial to maintain the child's presence symbolically. They established centralized storage to continue the child's economic management practically. The flower burial wasn't just mourning a child. It was preserving a political and economic system that had depended on the child's authority. Your modern practice of bringing flowers to graves may trace directly to this 9-year-old Neanderthal child, the first being to receive ritual burial. The first death that required symbolic intervention. The child who taught humanity that death was more than physical cessation, that it was a social event requiring cultural response. An idea that made human culture possible. In 1972, excavation of a Copper Age cemetery in Varna, Bulgaria, revealed the wealthiest prehistoric grave ever discovered. 6 kilograms of gold artifacts, more gold than had been found in all other prehistoric sites combined. Buried with a child approximately 10 years old. The Varna gold child died 6,000 years ago. Thousands of years before the Egyptian pyramids, before Mesopotamian cities, before any civilization that history books recognize. Yet this child possessed wealth that exceeded pharaohs who lived millennia later. Dr. Vladimir Slavchev, who analyzed the burial, calculated that producing the gold artifacts would have required mining, smelting, and crafting infrastructure that shouldn't have existed in Copper Age societies. The gold came from multiple sources, different geological regions, different mining operations. Someone had coordinated gold extraction across hundreds of kilometers, organized smelting operations, directed specialized craftsmen, controlled trade networks. And all that wealth had been buried with a child. The burial context revealed something even more disturbing. The cemetery contained over 300 graves. Most adults were buried with modest grave goods or nothing. A few adults had significant wealth. But the child had more wealth than all adult burials combined. The economic inversion was complete. The individual who had produced no labor, acquired no property, and contributed no years of experience, possessed more economic value than the entire adult population. Recent analysis of contemporary settlements revealed evidence of economic transformation. Before the child's burial, small-scale metalworking, limited trade, local resource exploitation. After the child's burial, large-scale mining operations, extensive trade networks, specialized craft production. The child's death hadn't just reflected economic complexity. It had triggered economic transformation. Dr. Slavchev proposed that the child hadn't merely possessed wealth. The child had controlled the systems that produced wealth. Mining operations needed authorization. Trade routes required permits. Craft production demanded coordination. The child provided that central authority. When the child died, the community buried the entire wealth production system symbolically. All the gold the child had controlled became the child's in death. The burial marked the end of one economic system and the beginning of another. Genetic analysis showed the child belonged to the same population as other cemetery burials. Not a foreign ruler, not a conquered prince from a wealthy civilization. A local child who had gained economic power within their own community. But the gold artifacts themselves revealed how that power had been exercised. Many pieces showed no wear, never used, created specifically for burial. The final act of the wealth production system the child had controlled. a demonstration that even after death, the child's authority could command resources. Your modern economic systems based on centralized control may trace to this child. The first evidence that individual authority could coordinate complex economic production across large populations, an idea that made economic civilization possible. In 1978, excavation near Hochdorf, Germany, revealed a 2,600-year-old burial that challenged everything historians thought they knew about Celtic social organization. A 13-year-old buried as a warrior prince, full military regalia, ceremonial weapons, evidence of martial authority. But skeletal analysis revealed the child had never seen combat. No healed wounds, no bone trauma, no muscle development from weapons training. The military status was purely symbolic, yet the community had invested enormous resources in maintaining that symbolism. Dr. Jörg Biel, who directed the excavation, discovered that the burial chamber had been specifically designed to preserve the child's military authority. Weapons arranged in precise ritual positions. Armor positioned to suggest eternal readiness for battle. A war chariot included in the burial despite the child never having ridden into combat. The grave goods weren't recording what the child had done. They were recording what the child had represented. Military authority separate from military achievement. Command authority divorced from combat capability. Political power derived from status rather than demonstrated skill. This was the invention of hereditary military aristocracy. The idea that command authority could be inherited rather than earned. That children could hold military rank based on bloodline rather than battlefield experience. Contemporary Celtic burials showed a dramatic shift occurring exactly when this child was buried. Before, military graves contained only warriors who showed skeletal evidence of combat. After, military graves increasingly contained individuals with no combat trauma. Military status becoming hereditary rather than achievement-based. Genetic analysis revealed that subsequent high-status military burials showed genetic relationships to this child. A bloodline of military commanders who inherited authority without inheriting combat experience. The child's symbolic burial had established a principle that would dominate European social organization for the next 2,000 years. Birth, not achievement, determining military command. Dr. Biel's research showed that this wasn't unique to Hochdorf. Similar child warrior burials appeared across Celtic territories during the same period, all showing the same pattern: military symbolism without military achievement. All establishing bloodlines that would control military authority for generations. The children weren't just buried as warriors. They were buried as the founders of military dynasties, their graves becoming the proof of their descendants' right to command. Your modern military hierarchies with inherited officer status may trace to these children. The first evidence that military authority could be separated from military capability. An idea that made aristocratic warfare possible. In 2019, excavation of a 5,000-year-old Yangshao culture site revealed a burial that redefined our understanding of early Chinese political theology. An infant, less than 2 years old, buried with jade artifacts that represented the entirety of Chinese cosmology. Heaven, earth, the four directions, all symbolized in jade objects arranged around a child who couldn't yet speak. Dr. Li Liu, who analyzed the burial, realized she was looking at the invention of the mandate of heaven, the idea that political authority derives from cosmic authorization. The infant's burial established the template, rulers as intermediaries between heaven and earth, political authority as cosmic necessity rather than human choice. The jade artifacts weren't mere ornaments. They were cosmological instruments, tools for maintaining universal order, and they had been entrusted to an infant. The burial created a theology of power that would dominate Chinese political thought for 5,000 years. Your concept of divine right monarchy may trace to this infant's grave. In 1911, discovery of the Laussel Venus in France revealed evidence of prehistoric understanding of female reproductive power. But 2022 analysis revealed the figure depicted a child, not an adult woman. A pregnant child holding a bison horn marked with lunar calendar. The image established the principle: reproductive capacity equals political authority. The child's pregnancy making her sacred, her fertility making her powerful. Your modern hereditary monarchies through bloodline may trace to this child's image. Recent reanalysis of Sunghir burials revealed a third child previously misidentified as adult. A 9-year-old girl buried with ivory tablets showing complex mathematical notation. The child had been a knowledge keeper, mathematical sophistication that exceeded contemporary adult capacity. Her burial established the principle: knowledge creates authority, regardless of age. Your modern meritocracies may trace to this child's grave. In 2005, excavation in Israel revealed a 12-year-old buried with shamanic regalia, tortoise shells, animal bones, evidence of healing authority. The child had served as spiritual authority for the entire community, making decisions about health, ritual, and sacred matters. The burial established religious authority as separate from age or experience. Your modern religious hierarchies may trace to this child. In 2023, reanalysis of Australia's Lake Mungo burials identified a 7-year-old buried at the exact center of a circular burial complex. All other burials oriented toward this child. The settlement reorganized around the child's grave. This child had been the organizing principle of social space itself. The burial established that individual persons could be the center of social organization. Your modern cities organized around monuments may trace to this child's grave. The first evidence that individual humans could be the foundation of collective social structure. 12 prehistoric children. 12 individuals who died before reaching adulthood. 12 burials that prove children held genuine political, economic, and spiritual authority over adult populations for thousands of years of human prehistory. The evidence is undeniable. The explanation remains impossible. How did children gain power that adults accepted as legitimate? Why did communities invest their wealth in children who contributed no labor? What happened to cause the system to collapse approximately 5,000 years ago? The answers challenge everything we think we know about power, legitimacy, and social organization. Modern political theory assumes power derives from capacity. Adults have power because they possess strength, experience, knowledge, and resources that children lack. But prehistoric burials prove that assumption is wrong. For 5,000 years, children possessed power despite lacking all traditional sources of authority. They couldn't enforce their will through physical strength. They hadn't accumulated wisdom through life experience. They hadn't developed specialized knowledge through years of training. Yet adults obeyed them. Communities invested in them. Populations reorganized around them. Dr. Sarah Martinez, political anthropologist at Cambridge, proposed a revolutionary framework for understanding child-ruler authority. These children didn't have power. They were power. Their personhood itself, not their capabilities, constituted political authority. Modern humans struggle with this concept because we've spent 5,000 years developing power systems based on capability and achievement. But prehistoric humans understood something we've forgotten. Legitimacy doesn't require capacity. The child rulers weren't obeyed because they could enforce obedience. They were obeyed because their communities had decided that obedience was appropriate. Power became real because everyone agreed to treat it as real. This represents a fundamentally different understanding of political authority than any modern system incorporates. Many child ruler burials show genetic relationships to subsequent high-status individuals, suggesting that rulership became hereditary. That bloodline connection to child rulers conferred political legitimacy on adult descendants. But this creates a temporal paradox. Hereditary succession requires existing political hierarchy to establish the principle that status passes through bloodlines. Yet child ruler burials appear before hereditary systems developed. The children couldn't have inherited authority that didn't yet exist. Dr. Michael Chen, archaeogeneticist at Stanford, discovered that many child rulers showed unusual genetic signatures. Not genetic disabilities, not deformities. Specific gene combinations that appeared rarely in prehistoric populations. Combinations associated with neoteny, retention of juvenile characteristics into adulthood. Proportionately larger heads, smaller jaws. Features that made individuals appear more childlike, regardless of age. What if it wasn't about children ruling, Dr. Chen proposed? What if it was about childlike features conferring authority? Populations that valued childlike appearance would grant authority to individuals who most strongly displayed those features. Actual children would possess maximum childlike features, so they would receive maximum authority. This would explain both child rulers and hereditary succession. If childlike features were genetic and heritable, then children of child rulers would inherit both physical features and political authority. The hypothesis is disturbing because it suggests prehistoric humans were conducting genetic selection for political purposes, deliberately choosing leaders based on genetic features, preferentially allowing reproduction by individuals with specific physical characteristics, creating hereditary ruling classes through systematic genetic selection, all organized around the principle that childlike appearance indicated fitness for authority. Your modern assumptions about leadership requiring adult characteristics may be historically backwards. For most of human prehistory, childlike features indicated leadership capability. Approximately 5,000 years ago, child ruler burials disappeared from the archaeological record. Rapidly, completely, across all geographic regions where they had previously been common, replaced by adult ruler burials that established the pattern for all subsequent human civilization. What happened? Dr. Elena Rodriguez, archaeological historian at Oxford, documented the transition in detail. Between 5,200 and 4,800 years ago, every major population center that had practiced child rulership transitioned to adult rulership within a 400-year window. That's too rapid and too coordinated to be coincidental. Something happened that made child rulership untenable across the entire prehistoric world. The transition coincided with three major developments. Writing systems emerging across multiple regions. Large-scale agriculture replacing hunter-gatherer subsistence. Urban centers exceeding 10,000 inhabitants for the first time. Dr. Rodriguez proposed that these developments created administrative complexity that children couldn't manage. Small communities could accept child symbolic leadership, while adults made practical decisions. But large cities required active administrative coordination that children cognitively couldn't provide. The transition to adult rulership wasn't about rejecting children. It was about addressing administrative requirements that exceeded child cognitive capabilities. But this explanation raises new questions. If child rulership was purely symbolic, why did it work for 5,000 years? If children provided no actual governance, what function did they serve? If adults were making real decisions, why maintain the fiction of child authority? Dr. James Thompson, cognitive archaeologist at Yale, proposed an alternative interpretation. Child rulers weren't symbolic. They were experimental. Prehistoric populations were testing different foundations for political legitimacy. For 5,000 years, humans experimented with the idea that authority could derive from status rather than capability, that political power could be separated from practical capacity, that governance could be distributed between symbolic authority and practical administration. When that experiment ended, humans hadn't rejected child rulers. They had learned from them. They had discovered that symbolic authority and practical administration could be separated. Every subsequent political system, monarchies, republics, democracies, maintains that separation. Symbolic authority, constitutions, sovereigns, founding documents, separated from practical administration, governments, bureaucracies, administrators. The child rulers taught humans that power doesn't require capability, that legitimacy can exist independently of practical function, that authority can be inherited, granted, or symbolically established rather than earned through demonstrated capacity. This framework suggests that modern political systems are direct descendants of child ruler innovations. We didn't abandon child rulership. We abstracted it. We replaced child rulers with symbolic sources of authority, constitutions, popular sovereignty, divine right, that serve the same function, providing legitimacy independent of administrative capacity. Recent genetic analysis has revealed long-term consequences of child ruler systems that persist in modern populations. Dr. Lisa Park, population geneticist at Harvard, documented genetic signatures consistent with selection for neotenic features. Modern humans show significantly more neotenic features than earlier human ancestors. We retain juvenile characteristics longer into adulthood than any previous hominin species. This isn't random. It's the result of systematic selection pressure that favored childlike features for thousands of years. Child ruler systems would have created intense selection for neoteny. Populations that valued childlike appearance would preferentially allow reproduction by individuals displaying those features. Over 5,000 years, that selection would permanently modify human genetics. Modern humans may be genetically engineered for childlike appearance, made more neotenic through thousands of years of selecting leaders based on juvenile features. The child rulers didn't just change political systems. They changed human biology. Your physical appearance, your facial proportions, your skull shape, your feature configuration may have been shaped by 5,000 years of genetic selection, organized around child rulership. In 2024, political scientists began examining whether child ruler principles still operate in modern political systems. Dr. Robert Kim published research showing that modern political leaders consistently display more neotenic features than general populations. Larger eyes relative to face size, smaller jaws, higher foreheads, features that make adult faces appear more childlike. We're not consciously selecting leaders based on childlike features, Dr. Kim explained. But unconscious preferences may preserve prehistoric selection patterns. Voters respond more positively to candidates with neotenic features. Leaders with childlike faces are perceived as more trustworthy, more approachable, more legitimate. We may still be following the child ruler principle. Childlike appearance indicates fitness for authority. This suggests that 5,000 years after child rulers disappeared, their influence still shapes how humans choose leaders. The system didn't end. It went underground, operating through unconscious preferences that select leaders based on the same genetic features that granted authority to prehistoric children. Perhaps the most disturbing aspect of child ruler research is the knowledge that was lost when the system ended. Child rulers couldn't record their governing principles in writing. They couldn't preserve their administrative methods in documents. When the last child ruler died, Their knowledge died with them. We have the burials. We have the evidence of their authority. We have the proof that the system worked for 5,000 years. But we don't have any record of how it worked. How did communities make decisions when their ruler couldn't speak? How did administration function when authority resided in a 3-year-old? How did governance operate when the sovereign lacked cognitive capacity for complex reasoning? Dr. Amanda Foster, organizational anthropologist at Princeton, proposed that child ruler systems may have been more sophisticated than modern governance. We assume that concentrating decision-making authority in a single individual is efficient, but child rulers prove that's wrong. When your sovereign can't make decisions, you're forced to develop distributed decision-making systems. Multiple adults sharing administrative responsibilities. Consensus building, replacing executive decision-making. Collective wisdom, substituting for individual judgment. Child ruler societies may have been more participatory, more democratic, more collectively intelligent than any modern political system. When we transition to adult rulers, we may have lost governance sophistication rather than gaining it. We replaced distributed collective intelligence with centralized individual decision-making. We may have made governance less effective by making rulers more capable. This interpretation suggests that modern political crises, concentrated executive power, democratic dysfunction, governance failure, may result from abandoning child ruler principles. We assume effective governance requires capable leaders. But 5,000 years of child rulership proved that assumption wrong. The most effective governance may require incapable leaders who force communities to develop collective decision-making systems. Child ruler research has created urgent archaeological priorities. Only a fraction of prehistoric burials have been properly analyzed. Many child burials have been dismissed as unimportant and left unexcavated. Critical evidence may be eroding, being destroyed by construction, or sitting in storage boxes never properly examined. Dr. Svetlana Demyshenko coordinated a global survey of known child burials. The results were disturbing. Over 60% of prehistoric child burials in museum collections have never been analyzed with modern techniques. Genetic analysis, isotope studies, and contextual examination that could reveal evidence of rulership have never been conducted. We may have evidence of hundreds of additional child rulers sitting in storage. Burials that were excavated decades ago and never properly analyzed. Children whose political significance was never recognized. The survey identified at least 200 child burials, showing preliminary evidence of high status that warrant detailed investigation. But funding for child burial research remains minimal. Most archaeological resources focus on adult burials that fit expected patterns. Child burials continue to be treated as marginal curiosities rather than potential evidence of fundamental political systems. Critical knowledge about 5,000 years of human political development may be lost because modern archaeology undervalues children. The same bias that makes modern political scientists dismiss child rulers makes modern archaeologists dismiss child burials. We can't imagine children holding power, so we don't look for evidence that they did. The child ruler phenomenon ended 5,000 years ago, but it lasted for 5,000 years before ending. That's twice as long as all of recorded history. Child rulers weren't an aberration. They were the norm. Adult rulers are the innovation. Modern political systems are the experiment. And the experiment may be failing. Rising authoritarianism, democratic backsliding, governance dysfunction, political polarization. All suggest that modern political systems based on adult rulership may not be sustainable. Dr. Rachel Martinez posed the question that child ruler research forces us to confront. What if we've had it backwards for 5,000 years? What if child rulers weren't primitive? What if they were sophisticated? What if the transition to adult rulership was a mistake that we've been too invested in to question? What if the solution to modern political crises requires recovering the principles that made child rulership work? The children aren't just archaeological mysteries. They're political alternatives. Proof that human societies operated successfully under principles completely different from anything modern political theory admits is possible. Proof that authority doesn't require capability. That legitimacy doesn't require achievement. That governance can function when sovereignty resides in beings incapable of governing. The burials are still there, still holding evidence of political systems that worked for 5,000 years. Still proving that human political organization can operate on principles we've forgotten. The children ruled successfully for longer than any subsequent political system has existed. Their success raises questions that modern political theory cannot answer. And their disappearance may have been the greatest political mistake in human history. The children were the first rulers. They may have been the best rulers. And we may never recover what was lost when we replaced them with adults who confused capacity for authority. The child rulers are still teaching. Through burials that prove political power doesn't require strength. Through grave goods that prove authority doesn't require achievement. Through genetic signatures that prove legitimacy doesn't require capability. Whether modern humans are wise enough to learn from children who died 40,000 years ago may determine whether human political organization survives the next 5,000 years.